Good evening. This is my grandma, Pauline Waters. She was born in 1914, lived through the Great Depression, 2 World Wars, and she was an all-around awesome person. When I was doing some research for this, I asked my mom to dig through some old photos, and she found this gem from 1934. It said on the back, "In order to save water, I use my shampoo suds to wash my canvas slippers." So that's pretty impressive. And apparently her frugality continued through the rest of her life, because I remember very clearly at her funeral, her friends and family joking about how frugal she was. So when my mom asked what possessions of hers I would like to keep to remember her, I said, does she still have those red Dixie plates? A little more on that later, but just remember the point of this whole talk is to get you to be like my grandma. All right, so I'm a 7th grade science teacher, and for years over my whiteboard there has been this slogan that says ignorance is boring, knowledge is power, power is responsibility, and responsibility requires action. So that's kind of the ideal for an educator. You want to inspire your kids to want to know more, then they get that knowledge, and it empowers them to take some kind of action, right? So I'd like to share about some struggles I've had with this philosophy, and they usually come about when we're talking about really complex, daunting problems, such as climate change or environmental destruction. So generally, these days, I would say the fight against ignorance is getting easier. Like, kids come to 7th grade knowing what global warming is, knowing how it works, knowing the gravity of the situation. So that has been less of a struggle, which is encouraging. Then we get to the problem of responsibility. So we start with a little conversation I call point the finger, and we play the blame game, and basically I say, okay, this is your chance. Whose fault is climate change, and who is responsible for fixing climate change? And so the fingers start flying everywhere. You got some of the usual suspects. You've got, big corporations, the government, China, certain billionaires. A lot of them like pointing their fingers at me for some reason. But then I get them back, okay? So I hit them with some data. And I really like using this website. It's called worldmapper.org. And basically it takes maps. So this would be your reference map that we all know. And then it distorts them based on statistics. So this is what you would expect, right? Total population, certain countries just blow up. Now, I hit them with a series of import maps. Here's toy imports. Here's valuables imports. And the trend continues down the list. You see certain countries ballooning up and other countries just shrinking to nothing. Here's a newer one that I haven't used yet, but it's a good picture of globalization. So it basically shows the flow of energy throughout the world. You can see shipping lanes and pipelines, and everywhere there's a bright spot, that's where energy is being used. Then we start talking about the cost of all this commerce and globalization. And that would be this map, ecological footprint. So basically, the redder you are, the more resources you're using. And in America, not to pick on us, but we are over 7 global hectares, which means we're using about 7 times more than what the Earth can sustain. I like juxtaposing this map with the poverty map. And if you toggle back and forth, you can see pretty clearly that the wealthier nations are the ones with the heavier ecological footprint. So at this point, students start pointing their fingers inwards at all of us, which is good, which is what I want. But also at this point, I start getting the complaints, Mr. Liu, this is really depressing, or Mr. Liu, this is adding to my anxiety. Which, as a teacher, is of course not what you want, right? You want to light a fire under their butts. You don't want the fire to completely consume them. So, I get kind of depressed teaching this too, right? 4 blocks in a row, watching corals bleach. It's really depressing. So, this is where the problem comes in. And if you're frustrated with the lack of, not the lack of solutions, the solutions are out there. There's amazing solutions that are just waiting to be scaled up. But like a lot of youth and like a lot of people, we're frustrated with the lack of taking action, the lack of taking responsibility. So what I'm going to propose is that we all embrace this ancient philosophy, which, if scaled up, can do a lot of good. And that philosophy is simply scaling down. So we're going to call this In Search of Simplicity, or KISS, if you're into the whole brevity thing. And I'm going to tell you pretty much why to do this and then how to do this. So we're going to focus on responsibility and then action. So this is another sign in my room: less is more. I think these 3 words have never been more important for us to embrace as humanity, because we have to realize it is now a zero-sum game where if you take something, someone else doesn't have it. So the more you take, the less someone else has. And what's making the game even more complicated is basically we are degrading the Earth's ability to run the game. And if you add more people in, it makes it even more complicated. So we're kind of like taking from the future as well. It's a really tricky situation. Now, this is my daughter playing More for Me, Less for You. And I'm sure you're thinking, man, this cuteness really betrays the gravity of the situation. But the reason I put it up here is because we're not getting the lesson that we teach little kids as soon as they can grab something. Don't be greedy, share, right? Just share that. So, I would say that if it's so clear that our current way of life is so destructive, that maybe this culture of consumption and domination of nature, that is the dark side, and it is consuming us all. So, like Master Yoda said, maybe we need to unlearn what we have learned. So, shifting gears, if the ecological moral argument doesn't do it for you, this is a little more metaphysical. So, if you've ever read this book, Sapiens, it's a great book, Brief History of Humankind, but he brought up an interesting point that historians rarely try to measure happiness, right? So modern humans, we kind of assume that we must be happier than a caveman, or we must be happier than some medieval peasant toiling away in the fields. But there's no way to know, really, because there's no data. But what scientists have done is come up with this thing called the happiness index. And here we are again in the red. So red is unhappy, green is very happy. Now some places you would expect, like if there's war or famine, that there would be a lot of unhappiness, but we seem to be headed the wrong direction. So this might sound a little naive, but I think maybe the point of civilization should be widespread happiness for as many people as possible. So it seems we're headed in the wrong direction. So where do we want to go? If the key to happiness is not all of those Amazon boxes piled in front of my house, maybe happiness doesn't come from a store. Maybe happiness needs a little bit more. And from my experience, the keys to happiness are just 2 simple things. They are connection and purpose, okay? Now, I'm not going to be so bold as to tell you how to find happiness, but I am going to suggest 4 guidelines to help you simplify your life, and maybe in the process you'll find more connection and purpose. So here they are. Number 1, recognize that comfort and convenience do not equal happiness, okay? In the first world, we have all these blurred lines between necessity and luxury, and you get a lot of first world problems, right? I can't live without this thing. So I think AC is a prime example of this. Are there any Floridians here? Sorry to pick on you, Florida, but you don't need the AC running 365 days a year. That's why people move to Florida, because it's gorgeous outside from October to April. So I like calling it the people conditioner, pretty much because if you can't live outside of a 5-degree range with low humidity without falling apart, I would say maybe you have been conditioned. So again, you have to recognize that human beings have been living without these comforts and conveniences for hundreds of thousands of years. I think it's making us a little soft, and ironically, it's warming the globe at the same time. So get comfortable with what you need. All right, lesson 2, now the mystery of the red plates. So we would go out to grandma's for Christmas every year, and grandma would serve Christmas dinner and kind of the whole week's worth of meals on these red disposable Dixie plates. And and then she would wash them after every meal, dry them, and bring them back out. So we thought it was hilarious too. Like my sister and cousins were like, "Oh, grandma, she's so cheap." But now I have such respect just for that act, because she saw the utility in the thing and got the maximum use out of it, and at the same time was like celebrating a special occasion. So that to me is the greatest generation. Go down a generation. This is my mother, grandma's daughter. And when we were opening our stockings at Christmas, she would always say, "Oh, when we were kids, we would get a tangerine in our stocking." And some people are nodding their heads. And that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, 1 tangerine a year? And she's like, "Yes, and it was the most delicious fruit ever." And I'm, at that age, I'm thinking, that's weird. I just go to the store when I want a tangerine. And then fast forward one more generation, and this really bothers me. I find just entire oranges just thrown on the ground. And I kind of go off on my students. They know it's coming. But I challenge them. I say, don't eat a thing for 24 hours and see if you look at that orange any differently. They rarely take me up on that. So from basically 3 or 4 generations ago, we have this huge transition where it seems like scarcity is the main driver of simplicity, right? Because you just have to do it. Our challenge these days is going to be, with everything at our fingertips, can we make frugality and conservation fashionable again? Okay? Can we make gluttony and wastefulness shameful and dishonorable? So in order for that to happen, it's going to take us to be mindful of the value and energy that goes into everything. All right. Number 3, ask yourself, are you connecting or disconnecting? So I like to run this little project with my 7th graders. It's kind of one of those life as an experiment projects. And the question we're trying to answer is, how will reducing my screen time affect my well-being? And I'm not going to say cell phones are the tools of the devil. They could be, but the theme that we're exploring is technology as a double-edged sword. So, ask yourself. So here's what we do, and you can imagine some kids have to be dragged into this kicking and screaming. But first, we take a baseline. We see how much time they're using on the day. Then we set a goal. We try to chop it like 25 to 50%. We have them come up with a strategy, right? Because you can't go cold turkey just staring at your hand, bro. And then then we take some measures of well-being to kind of see if the treatment is going to have any effect. So we have them do little surveys. How focused do you feel? How stressed? What's your, how rested do you feel? What's your physical fitness? And they come up with some of their own variables. All right, then we try it and observe it. We try to get parents and family members and teachers to do it in solidarity, and then we just go with it. So 2 weeks later, and I used to do it for 30 days, but that proved pretty challenging. So the conclusions. So some kids come out of it and they're like, no, never again. That was awful, never again. And I do know that some kids fudge all their numbers and don't really make the attempt at all. I know who you are. And I suggest to them that they might conclude I have a problem with my screens. But the students that do attempt it with integrity often report at the end that they feel more rested, less stressed, just generally more healthy. And then with all that extra time, they're finding out that they have time and energy to make deeper connections with family, with friends, with their pets, right? Dogs get walked a lot, with nature, with their hobbies, their instruments, and even with God and spiritual practices. So it seems like a fair trade to me, but you might want to try it yourself. I'm about to spring this on my current group of 7th graders next week. Wish us luck outside the matrix. All right, last one, number 4, break away from tradition and follow your bliss. So just a quick story of a camping trip. If you remember the summer of 2020, it seemed like the world was on fire. And my buddy Chris and I just wanted to get out. So he knew this really secluded spot. We went out. It had been raining the whole morning, so we gathered firewood for like 2 hours. He wanted to make a bow drill fire. If you've ever done that, you have to like get the tinder just perfect. So he got it going after a couple tries. We were very proud of ourselves. We had enough wood stocked up, sitting around the fire. And then we got lured out to the best part of the spot, which was this lava bubble where this huge oak tree had at one point fallen and continued to grow sideways. And underneath the oak tree, all the leaf litter had created all these little ecosystems. So we just went out there and started exploring, and then we laid down on the rock and watched the clouds, listened to the animals, cranked some tunes, had some good conversation, the stars came out. And after about 2 hours, we realized the fire had gone out, and we never needed it in the first place, right? There was like, it was warm enough, there were no bugs, we could see by the light of the moon. So that struck us both as this metaphor of just what man does. Like all the stuff we consume, all the stuff that consumes us, that's just the old tradition that we need to break away from. So my final message on this is break away from a life that is consumed by things that don't matter, less distractions, less stuff, less destruction, and more of what sustains us and brings us closer together. And lest you think I'm just a mean old Grinch trying to preach voluntary poverty on y'all, please know that special occasions are okay. I also live by the old adage, everything in moderation except ice cream.